Hello, everyone, and welcome to the South Carolina Agribusiness webinar. My name is Nicolette Macklin, and I'm a representative from the South Carolina Department of Commerce Europe office. On behalf of our office, I'd like to thank all of you for taking the time to join us today. We have an amazing turnout, and we're really looking forward to the content that we've prepared for you all. Our Europe office is located in Munich, Germany, and we are here to assist European-based companies that are interested in expanding physical locations into the U.S. market. And we provide free of charge advisory support regarding market and industry information, details on workforce development, site selection support, and guidance on resources that you can use when you're looking into the U.S. market and also after you land and become a South Carolina business. But to accomplish this, we work with several partners in the state to ensure our companies know who to speak with and that they have the tools they need to get their operations up and running. So today we have 5 speakers that are more than familiar with the agribusiness market and industry, and they're here to provide you with a little bit of an overview of why you should consider South Carolina as a potential location for your future operations. Please feel free to use the chat box that is on the platform to send in any questions that you have for the speakers, and we'll try to answer them at the end of today's program. And if we're unable to get to your question today, we'll be sure to follow up with you after with an answer. But before we get started with everything, we want to know how many people here have actually been to South Carolina before. So if we can take just a few minutes, we will have a poll pop up. And if you can provide us with an answer, we'll show the results a little bit later. We'll take just a few more seconds. All right, so without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Ted Campbell. Ted, if you want to pop on over with your video. Ted Campbell is a senior project manager for the South Carolina Department of Commerce. So he is actually located in our main office, which is in Columbia, South Carolina, whereas I'm located in our Europe office in Munich, Germany. So Ted has been with the agency for more than 20 years, and he joins us today with just a wealth of knowledge on the food and forestry industry. And he also, of course, knows what it looks like to work with South Carolina on your next location. So I'll let Ted go ahead and take it away from here.
Thank you, Nicolette. Well, it's good to be here. Welcome to everyone. As Nicolette said, I'm a project manager with the Department of Commerce located here in Columbia, South Carolina, our capital city. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what's going on in the agribusiness world. So yes, next slide, please. So yeah, we define agribusiness in 2 areas, really, forestry and agriculture. It encompasses food processing, livestock and produce, and wood and forestry products. And although South Carolina is quite industrialized, a lot of manufacturing, we still have a lot of farm acreage and timberlands. We're still in parts of the state still very rural, so we produce a lot of product. The agribusiness economy is quite strong. It's a $41.7 billion impact in the state. I think those numbers are continuing to go up. We employ 68,000 people, so it's a significant business sector here, and you can see some of the marquee names over here to the left. Companies you may recognize that call South Carolina their home. Next slide, there you go. So we have a partnership, and I think that's one of the things that makes it so successful here. Not only here at the Department of Commerce, South Carolina Department of Agriculture, who you'll hear from next, Clint Leach is here, the South Carolina Forestry Commission, not represented here today, but They're very much part of our initiative for agribusiness support. They bring to the table the ability to collaborate on projects and assistance with companies. They can bring together technical resources that we don't have here. So we do everything from business recruitment to sharing resources and technical information. So let's step back and take a look at South Carolina, where we're located, because this has an impact on the success we're seeing here. We're strategically located in the Southeast, and as you may know, the Southeast United States is the fastest growing area. Huge population base down in our region. South Carolina itself is 5 million people, relatively small, but if you look at the region, it's significantly larger. Next slide. So here we are. From a location perspective, logistically, we can reach two-thirds of the U.S. population within 1,000 miles. And so that radius there is a 500-mile reach. Within a day's truck drive, you see you can reach a significant portion of the U.S. population. Next slide. So yeah, as I mentioned, with that outreach to the market, the domestic market, we also have global connections through the Port of Charleston, a very efficient, large container port. This map here shows the state of South Carolina. Port of Charleston is on the coast down there in the lower right-hand corner. You can also see the connectivity here with the 5 interstates that crisscross the state in terms of moving goods in and around, again, domestically, but also out of the Port of Charleston. Next. And then our business climate is very friendly toward businesses. It's the cost of living, construction costs, electricity costs are much less than the U.S. average, and that allows for a stable, fiscally responsible budget. As we point out here, the state constitution requires that. What that means to you is that there's really no surprises in terms of taxes. We have a government that consistently is fiscally responsible, trying to keep our corporate taxes low. Let's speak a minute to the infrastructure requirements for food and wood industries, because specifically that's where we feel like we have a bit of an edge in the ability to support and work with these types of industries. First of all, the water supply and water quality in the state of South Carolina is quite good. We have significant supply in some areas of the country. Water is a challenge, but we've got 2 major aquifers that are supplying water, deep aquifers. One of them is currently the location for a large water bottle company. Nestle has a plant there, and they're using the water in the aquifer, spring water. So we also have a wastewater treatment capacity because food projects will have some challenges with some of their wastewater effluent. So we're seeing in some communities the ability to effectively treat that water, wastewater. So transportation connectivity, as I mentioned with the port, we've got deep harbor there and continue to deepen those harbors for large containers. The inland ports, there's 2 of them in the upstate of South Carolina, which allows connection to the port through direct rail. As I mentioned, the interstate highways are there, allowing companies to access their markets as well as bringing in raw materials. And finally, rail. We have 2 class lines that some larger projects, for example, some wood projects require rail, so we've got that ability. And finally, I mentioned earlier, their electricity is reliable and affordable. And I stress the term reliable because in many places we have redundant power, which makes sure your 24/7 operations are continuing to run. Some very important with some cold storage and some operations there. Next slide. So touch on workforce training. In general, we have been very successful through our state technical college system to help companies locate, find good employees, help train those. They have customized training programs. The Ready SC program specifically is the term we use at the technical college, and they've been doing this for over 50 years, specifically for the food industry. Since we have so many food companies here, they've become very well versed in food safety, some of the regulatory requirements that go along with that, GMPs, things of that nature. So they understand what it takes to get a food processing company up and running, and can help you identify and train those employees. And the best part of that is it's no cost to you. So that's a very important program. The apprenticeship program is something fairly new, but it's very successful in the ability to bring in some younger people in an apprenticeship type arrangement. Ready SC, the folks at the technical college system, can help you consult with you on that program as well. And finally, from an education standpoint, let me point out that Clemson University in South Carolina has a specific program for food science education. So there's a pipeline of talent there for you. As you can see, there's a number of areas that they're working in to deliver students out of there that understand the food processing, the nutritional aspect of it. And they also provide technical support to companies there as well. We'll be happy to, if you had an interest in getting to know the folks at Clemson University, we'd be happy to make those introductions. So I'll talk specifically about the wood industry in South Carolina. I know Clint Leach, who's next with the Department of Agriculture, will speak more specifically about the agricultural aspect of it. But so their primary sectors, I guess, in the wood industry, you've got sawmills, Georgia Pacific, West Fraser, for example. Pulp and paper mills, we still have a number of pulp and paper mills here. International Paper, West Rock. Board manufacturers, Arauco, Georgia Pacific, they're making everything from high density fiberboard, MDF as well, OSB, which is an oriented strand board. So we've got a lot of board manufacturing here. Laminated veneer lumber. This is kind of an interesting project that we worked on with Roseburg Forest Products. They're making a structural beam that's the largest press in the world right now. If they can make a structural beam out of laminated veneer, that's over 60 feet long. So it's pretty cool. And in flooring and furniture, Swiss Chrono down in Barnwell area is making flooring using HDF products. And this is the reason, this is a slide from our Forestry Commission showing you the type of data we can put together. So this just shows you over the past several years that the natural stands, or the amount of wood that's out there, is fairly consistent. We are an area of over 12 million acres right now, and 25 billion cubic feet of total forested acres or available timber. And the interesting thing there is that if you look at the lighter green area, it's showing the planted stands, which means that we are consistently now resupplying our forest lands. So this is a renewable resource. Next slide. And this just shows you what the composition of the timber is in here. Surprisingly enough, we have softwoods, pine, southern yellow pine, but we also have almost an equal supply of hardwoods. And because of this supply, this wood basket, if you will, in the Southeast, that's the reason we have so many wood-related industries here, because the raw material, the product, is in the Southeast. So we're doing everything, again, from from dimensional lumber to paper to boards, and we also export a good bit of product as well. Next. So on the food processing side, as I mentioned, Clint will speak more to this, but it's basically in these areas, poultry processing, huge number of companies here that are growing the poultry, both and then it goes into the chicken processing or poultry processing plants. And we also export some products as well. Food production, pretty much everything you could imagine, all types of food processing facilities. I'll speak to some specifics in just a minute, but frozen, fresh, canned, baked, you name it, we do it. Spices, flavorings, and ingredients, we've got companies that are providing those products. And then beverages, as I mentioned earlier, we've got a couple of water bottle plants, soft drinks, craft beer, distilled spirits. Pet food has been a growing niche area over the past several years. So we've got several pet food companies. Next. So this gives you a kind of a sense of what we're working on right now. These are active projects at the Department of Commerce. These are projects, these are companies that we're working with. As you can see, the vast majority on the food side. You can take the processing and then the baked goods, that's well over 50%. And then the forest products, wood and paper comprise the other majority of that. Next. And then overall, currently active projects here at Commerce for the month of September. This is pretty indicative of the activity that's going on. We work in a number of industry sectors here. As a project manager, I'm focused on agribusiness. We've got other project managers that are in the automotive space, aerospace, manufacturing, and things of that nature. But if you look at this, it shows that agribusiness, when you include the wood and paper as well, is close to 13% currently for active projects. So what that means is that it competes head-to-head with the automotive sector, which has traditionally been and continues to be our strong suit as well. You know, obviously with BMW, Volvo, and Mercedes Sprinter van plant, we've got 3 OEMs. But agribusiness is strong, and it continues to be, and it compares well with our other major sectors. Next. So I'm going to highlight some major projects. Kay Maxwell in Southern Carolina, this is where this project ended up. She'll talk more about it, but this is a huge project that was just announced down that way, and it's the Agriculture Technology Campus, which is going to include a number of environmentally controlled growing facilities, as well as distribution, as well as a food processing facility. So it's a pretty exciting project going on down there. Next. And then over the past several years, we've had some really impactful announcements that have occurred. These are just some of the major companies that announced expansions or new facilities in South Carolina. McCall Farms is an interesting company, homegrown, been around a long time. They're into vegetable processing, local fruits and vegetables, and they have primarily a canning operation, and they're probably over 900 people there now. So it's been a growing, good to see a local company continue to grow like that. Roseburg Forest Products, which I mentioned earlier with the LVL product. Colombo Energy is they make wood pellets for export energy purposes. We've got a large gold mining operation. West Rock has a paper facility in Florence. They continue to grow that facility. Dr. Pepper Keurig Dr. Pepper, that is, making K-Cups in Spartanburg, 600,000 square feet up there. And Swiss Chrono, as I mentioned, continues to grow in Barnwell County. They make a flooring product. They're now making their own HDF, which is high density fiberboard. Reese Foods, which is a California-based Mexican food company. They make frozen prepared meals. Their largest plant now is in Florence County, and so it continues to grow. And then New Indy recently bought up an existing paper plant, is converting it into a recycled paper mill. So some significant announcements along the way, and many more that are on the book right now. So next slide. And finally, let me just let you know that if you're interested in South Carolina, clearly work with Nicolette at our Munich office, but just know that I stress the word team, because you heard me talk about the other players, Department of Agriculture, Forestry Commission. The team support you would have in South Carolina is significant. We do everything from site selection process, helping you evaluate utilities if you're interested in looking at a location for a manufacturing or processing facility. Of course, logistics remain a big factor, and then, as I mentioned earlier, workforce assessment and training, even regulatory assistance. We can connect you with the right people in the state, making sure we understand the whole permitting process. We'll facilitate incentives documents for you, and then most importantly, project confidentiality. We would assign a project name. We would continue to work through a project confidentiality agreement with you and respect that through the whole process. So if you're interested, we look forward to working with you, and feel free to contact us. We're easy to work with, and I think we can bring a good team together to help you evaluate South Carolina. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ted. We appreciate the information you provided. And as you all can see, just the agribusiness industry within the state is really booming. And we know that the companies that are joining us today are really within just different realms of the agribusiness industry itself. So we hope that the information that Ted has provided you gives you just a little bit of a tease and allows you to come to us looking for more in-depth conversation about South Carolina and your business specifically. But as Ted mentioned, we frequently work with our partners, such as the Department of Agriculture. And today we have Clint Leach, who is the Assistant Commissioner. So Clint leads the agency's government affairs, economic development, as well as the marketing departments. So today he'll be sharing a bit about the agency and what's been going on, particularly during 2020.
Nicolette, thank you. Good morning, good afternoon to everybody who's on the call. Clint Leach, pleased to be here to help educate each of you on who South Carolina is, what our agency is, and what the agribusiness industry means to South Carolina. As Ted says, and I think what you'll hear throughout the other speakers after me, is that we are a team. We are Team South Carolina. We work very closely with the Department of Commerce. We work very closely with the Forestry Commission, with the regional economic development directors at the county and the alliance level, one you'll hear from shortly, and then all of the allied players, the law firms, engineering firms, architecture firms, to make, when you make a decision to come to South Carolina, we're ready to go all hands on deck to get you into the best spot that you need. From our agency's perspective, just real quickly, we're unique in that we handle food, we recruit food processing, we work very heavily, we have an economic development team, and then we market South Carolina products that are grown by our farmers. And we also, when we have spare time, interface with the federal government, so we are fully understanding of the rules and regulations coming out of Washington, D.C. So just to give you a quick overview of what the South Carolina agribusiness industry is for South Carolina. It is the largest industry in South Carolina, and that is when you add all of agriculture and all of forestry together, that Ted has already talked through a little bit. I think on the screen you'll see some of the largest crops in the state, some of the more successful crops. We have seen a lot of growth in the last 5 to 10 years, particularly in the fruit and vegetable industry. And hopefully that is an opportunity for creating a supply chain if and when you locate to South Carolina. Because of that growth in the fruit and vegetable sectors, I think we're very proud to say that in 2008 we began measuring the overall agribusiness impact to our state's economy. 2008 we measured that to be around $34 billion. So that set a baseline. We have a goal that by the end of this year, 2020, we will be a $50 billion industry. And I'm proud to say that after 2008, we went back and measured our impact in 2012, and that grew to roughly $42 billion impact, employing more than 200,000 folks throughout the state. And as Ted just hinted on, just last week, we unveiled a new impact study which highlights a further growth of our industry, and now it is at a $46 billion impact to the annual economy in South Carolina. So we're very pleased at the growth that we've seen. We've seen a little bit of a interesting take because we as an industry grew in the early 2010s during a modest recession when many industries were actually shaping down. So we're very pleased that as an industry, we are continuing to grow. So hopefully now you know a little bit about who we are, what we do. Here are some of the key targeted sectors that we're going after, having conversations with, and recruiting. Poultry is our largest subsector of agriculture in South Carolina. We have numerous processing facilities from companies of which many of you probably know the names, two of which I'll just highlight. Pilgrim's Pride JBS has a facility in the central Midlands of South Carolina, and then Purdue has a processing facility in the northeastern section of South Carolina. And this is a sector that we are eager to grow, and I think that there's some opportunities to grow there. The other segment that I want to specifically talk about, and I'm sure you're going to hear a little bit more about it from Kay Maxwell after me, is controlled environmental agriculture. As Ted said, we just last month announced a $314 million investment in rural Hampton County, South Carolina, which is in the southeastern part of the state, very close proximity to Interstate 95. We're very proud about this announcement because it was truly out of a good bit of research that we did. Our team went to the Netherlands in 2018 to learn about this industry, to learn about how the research universities interface with these private companies. And then out of that came a very thorough feasibility study that we did in state with some of our partners, which really highlight the value of this industry sector. So with that, we went to work very aggressively, worked with the Department of Commerce, worked with Southern Carolina Alliance, and out of that came his historic announcement, the Agriculture Technology Campus that was headquartered by some preeminent growers and co-packers and distributors, is the largest announcement in the state's agricultural history. And we also were very proud to have this announcement as the largest opportunity zone announcement throughout the entire country. So in addition to the advantages that Ted has talked through about us being a team and the services that we can deploy, and he's already talked about this a little bit, there's roughly 4.8 million acres of farmland throughout South Carolina. Of that 4.8 million acres, we have roughly 25,000 acres, 25,000 farms in South Carolina, and those farms grow anything from apples to zucchinis. And we particularly see an advantage for companies as they locate to South Carolina, because we see those farms being a local supply chain. And so as you determine your plans and look to South Carolina, we hope that you would strongly consider using our South Carolina farmers' raw agricultural products as a supply chain, whether it's tomatoes or eggs or poultry or timber. We hope that those products will be part of the conversation. So in terms of a return on investment, I know each of you, your companies or your clients, as they make decisions to expand and grow, they're looking at return on investments. We as a state agency are no different. We recently did a study to look at return on investment specific to rural South Carolina, especially for the purposes of distributing incentive grants when a company receives a grant. So what you will see is that for every $1 that's invested in rural South Carolina, a food manufacturer will create $1.34 in new economic activity. The poultry sector, a little bit less than food manufacturing, but still very positive, $1.27 in new economic activity. And I think that tells the story that when you come to rural South Carolina, because of these positive returns on investments, you will be received very positively within the community, and we stand by and are ready to help you with introductions in these local communities as you move forward. So just highlighting a couple of programs that we have internally as you begin to determine your growth plans. In addition to some of the incentives that the State Department of Commerce offers, we do have a separate standalone infrastructure incentive grant program. In South Carolina, counties are ranked in a tiered system, where Tier 1 is most developed and Tier 4 is the least developed. So our focus from an economic development standpoint is growing counties in the Tier 3 and 4 areas. So depending on your job creation in terms of the capital investment and the number of new jobs you create, we do have grant monies available to help with certain infrastructures to make these announcements a reality. In addition to that, we have a fairly new tax credit that's in its second year of existence. So when you are in South Carolina and you establish a base in year one of total agricultural purchases from South Carolina, if you purchase at least $100,000 in ag products from our farmers and have at least a 15% increase over that next year, we do have a tax credit available that will be offered up to $100,000 per entity. In addition to that, not necessarily an incentive, but we do have a new program in our department, the Agribusiness Center for Research and Entrepreneurship, ACRE, which is a very fitting acronym for that program. This program is geared towards working with our current farmers and agribusiness companies, whether large or small, to help them craft business plans, to help with research projects, working with our land-grant universities, Clemson and South Carolina State. And then we also have funding available for companies who have products that have gone through those initial stages and are ready to be put into the marketplace. And we've over the last 3 years, we've assisted a number of companies dealing, some with agro-technologies, some with seafood industry. So we're very excited about this program and what it means for the future of South Carolina agribusiness. As Ted said, we have 42 current projects at the Department of Agriculture. And I'll just highlight to say that since 2011, since we really began this partnership, we've created nearly $4 billion in economic activity. On the next slide, just highlights a couple of recent project announcements we've made. We've got indoor farming, we've got industrial hemp, we've got food processing, distilled spirits, and packaging. And I think this just points to how nimble we are as an industry. So just quickly skipping the next slide, this is a couple of companies that you're familiar with most likely that speak to who we are as an industry. And on the next slide, and I know I'm running tight on time, but we've done a tremendous amount of research on what COVID-19 means for our industry. I know we've all been affected, whether directly or indirectly, by COVID-19, and we've really focused on food safety from a consumer standpoint, but more or less, more than that, creating a local supply chain. Going back to that supply chain, consumers want local foods more now than ever, and so we're committed, whether during COVID now or after COVID, to working with whomever it is in South Carolina to source those local products to create that local supply chain. So with that in mind, I'm going to stop there. In the next slide, my contact information is, I think one more slide. My contact information is available if you would like to schedule a call or you want to send an email. I'm happy to schedule meetings with our economic development team to talk through more of these details, and certainly happy to answer any questions that you have during the question and answer period. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Clint. So we have now the results from the poll that we asked earlier today about who all's been to South Carolina. And it turns out only 30% of our group here has actually been in our state. So for those of you that have not, we really encourage you to take a visit so that you can explore some of the different areas of the state. And so that brings me to our next speaker, Kay Maxwell. Kay is the Vice President of Marketing for the Southern Carolina Alliance, which is a partnership of several counties within our state. So we rely on partners like Kay to help get county-specific information, and we work together to be sure companies have the research, infrastructure, and resources they need to run a successful business in South Carolina. So I'll let Kay go ahead and take it away from here to share a bit about the county she represents.
Thank you, Nicolette. I'm checking to make sure I can move the slides forward here. Here we go. So thank you. As several of our speakers have already mentioned, in South Carolina, economic development is definitely a team effort. So the first thing I wanted to share with you is whether you represent a small company or a large one, you can have a level of comfort that here in South Carolina, we're going to make it very easy for you to enter the U.S. market and to create an operation here stateside. The area of South Carolina that I represent is an alliance of 7 counties, and they are located near the ports of Charleston and Savannah. The way that we work here in South Carolina is that we work hand in hand with the State Department of Commerce. Our organization is a nonprofit organization, and our sole purpose is to recruit companies like yours to create jobs for the people of our area. One of the reasons we're involved in this webinar today is because the counties in our region, and I'm trying to get the slides to work here. They're not moving forward. So there we go. So the counties in our region and those along I-95 in South Carolina are very interested in agribusiness. We are particularly interested in agribusiness, and that's one of the reasons we are participating today. So I'm going to tell you a little about what's going on in agribusiness and give you some examples of companies that are succeeding in our part of South Carolina that may be helpful to you. First of all, I did want to repeat that we're close to 2 major seaports on the East Coast, the ports of Charleston, South Carolina, and Savannah, Georgia. And as Ted mentioned earlier, we have excellent interstate access so that you can reach 2/3 of the U.S. population within a day's drive. And South Carolina is crisscrossed by 5 interstates. I-95, which is the major north-south corridor, runs right through our region of the state. 1/3 of the exits on I-95 in South Carolina are in our part of the state. And South Carolina is located halfway between New York and Miami on the East Coast. Again, we're sharing with you today, we have a great deal of foreign investment across South Carolina. And at any time, we'll be glad to provide a list of those companies to you. Here's a sampling of some of the foreign investment in my part of South Carolina, and you can see that that varies across quite a few diverse industry sectors. And when we're talking about agribusiness, again, to give you a level of comfort, wanted to share with you that we have all types of agribusiness flourishing in our state, from large international companies to small ones, food and beverage processing, forest products. We also have a lot of small homegrown companies that sprouted up here in South Carolina. We also have machinery and chemical companies that are doing business in the agribusiness sector. And then we have a lot of distribution of agribusiness products. And I'm going to share a few examples of those. And here's the map, again, showing you our area of the state with the logos of some of those companies that are located in our state. And you'll see on the bottom right-hand corner of this slide, this is our website, southerncarolina.org. And on that website, under our industry list, you can find hot links to the websites of all the companies in agribusiness that are doing business in our area. So let's talk about some of the types of companies that are doing business with us. One large international company that I wanted to mention is Swiss Krono. It's a leader in the wood laminate flooring business. They located in Barnwell, South Carolina in the year 2000 and made an investment of $135 million and created 140 jobs. Since then, they've expanded twice. And then in 2016, they made another announcement, not an expansion, but a second facility was built on the same campus where they created a high-density fiberboard facility, investing $230 million and creating more jobs. Their total investment now is at $439 million, and they're employing 300. And here's just a look at their campus. We call this Swiss Krono City. They've invested so much in this area, and the second plant is under construction. We hope that the COVID restrictions will be up soon, and that when you're in South Carolina, you can visit this campus. One of the reasons that Swiss Krono located in this area was the location of the wood fiber basket in South Carolina. Secondly was the workforce. And then thirdly was that we had the right infrastructure in place for such a large manufacturing project. And South Carolina, you will find, has invested very well in large industrial parks, spec buildings, and in marketing some of their existing manufacturing facilities across the state. So there is a place for just about any size and type of company. This particular company located at the South Carolina Advanced Technology Park because of the massive infrastructure that was in place that they would need. And here's just a listing of some of the infrastructure that's there. One of the things that we did for this company that I think we had some questions about is we helped them with their hiring process. Ted mentioned earlier, South Carolina has a great training program, and we also are very helpful in walking you through your hiring process and helping you with that. Another thing that we did is we provided free office space during the construction of this facility, and even after the construction of the facility, we helped this company with some landing pad space where they could locate their showroom and their offices. So these are the types of things that we do here in our state for companies. Another large project that we touched on is in the food processing and produce areas. Just last month here in South Carolina, we announced the Agriculture Technology Campus. It is actually a partnership of 3 major produce producers: Mastronardi, which produces the Sunset Grown brand, Clearwater Farms, and Ledestri. Currently, about 80% of the tomatoes and leafy greens consumed in our country are produced in California and Mexico. And this now gives us a very large hub of production for what we call controlled environment agriculture, or CEA facilities. Clint with the Department of Agriculture mentioned this earlier. This company has invested in 1,000 acres, and they will have huge year-round growing of tomatoes, leafy greens, and berries at this facility. Another unique aspect of this facility is that they're also building a co-packing and distribution facility on site. And there's a lot of potential for research and development in the future. So we're very excited about this project. You're probably going to hear us from South Carolina talking about this project quite a bit, because we believe it's going to help us attract even more producers to South Carolina who are interested in both produce and in food processing. And again, it was a $14 million investment, and it'll create over 1,500 direct jobs. This follows on the heels of another project, Yield Scientific, that announced in April of 2020. They invested $30 million in 107 jobs at a hemp processing and growing facility. They produce hemp for a therapeutic pain relieving cream called Victus CBD. Both the ATC, Agriculture Technology Campus, and Yield Scientific, located at a facility or at a park called the Southern Carolina Industrial Campus. This campus is over 1,300 acres. It's located right off of I-95, again, the major north-south corridor on the East Coast, and it has all the infrastructure in place. South Carolina has properties like this throughout the state that could provide a good home for your company. And we have really invested in making sure that we have infrastructure in place for water and sewer needs, as well as large utility needs with electricity and gas as well. And this is just a map that shows its proximity to I-95. It's literally 5 minutes off the interstate on a 4-lane highway. And that's where you can see where ATC is being constructed and Yield Scientific. And then the map also shows some other existing companies there. This property is also unique because it's 55 minutes from the Port of Savannah and only 65 minutes from the Port of Charleston. So it's equidistant, virtually equidistant to the 2 ports. Now, I've talked about 2 very large projects. So if you have a small company, you're wondering, well, what can South Carolina do for me, and how can I fit in South Carolina? Just wanted to share with you another project we just had in the last year. Here's a little homegrown company called Innovative Poultry. Innovative Poultry has invented several devices and some equipment for the poultry industry. Here they're showing off the Poultry Hawk, which is a conveyor system used in poultry houses. We worked with this small company that only had 6 or 7 employees and assisted them with a $500,000 expansion and the addition of 10 jobs. Both the State Department of Commerce and our regional alliance, Southern Carolina Alliance, help them with financial assistance in making this expansion. In addition to that, we have quite a few food and beverage processing companies in the area. And here's just a look at a few that I wanted to point out. One is Hurricane Products. Again, that's one of the pet food companies that we have growing in South Carolina. This one is a Canadian company producing gourmet pet treats. They located in our region recently, and we helped them with their startup as well. There's another little pet food company, Lucky Dog Cuisine, and this is truly a boutique gourmet type operation, very small with just a few employees. And what they're doing is producing gourmet organic pet food that is packaged and freeze-dried and shipped overnight for people with very pampered pets. Another two in the beverage side are Coca-Cola, which of course is an American company that just recently expanded in our area, adding 20 jobs. And then Crescent Dairy and Beverage, a Dominican company. They produce the ultra-pasteurized boxed milk that has a long shelf life. And they located in our region, again, at a facility along I-95 because they've got great distribution for both European and South American markets there. Another business I want to mention was Syrah. Syrah is located in our region, and they produce MREs, and they do meals that are meant for both military and for medical reasons that produce extreme hydration for those who are dehydrated. And so this has, you know, great implications in food processing, but also in the medical and military fields as well. And then we also have companies like Birdsong Peanuts that are distribution facilities for the local peanut farmers, and of course, huge giants in the grain industry like Archer Daniel Midland. I want to touch on a few. We talked about Swiss Chrono being a huge project in the forest products sector. We also have companies like sawmills, homegrown ones like Cullum Lumber Company, but also huge giants in that industry sector like Canfor have invested in our area. And then we have quite a few forest product companies that locate in our region, including Cascades, which produces toilet tissue, and Queenwood Products, which produces equine shavings and bedding from lumber. And then also in the agribusiness and food processing, I wanted to just touch on chemicals, machinery, and equipment. We're very familiar with these kinds of companies as well. We have everything from Crane Dixie Narco located in our area. They produce the majority of vending machines sold in the US for beverages and food. And then we have small companies like Oakwood Chemical and Inifus that produce nutrients and other granulated products that are used in everything from vitamins to food products. And then Floralife and Helena, of course, are also chemical companies that are used in the floral and agriculture sectors. And then getting here finally, as we wrap up, so why do we have such diverse agribusiness in South Carolina? Of course, we talked about proximity to markets and just for distribution in our ports and interstate, but also we have welcoming companies that actually appreciate agribusiness and manufacturing. Ted mentioned our low cost of operation, and one thing we did not mention is our great quality of life. South Carolina is a beautiful state. It is a choice for many retirees as well, and people also vacation here. And then finally, we are going to be talking about business incentives, but I wanted to mention that here at the regional level, we also offer incentives. Ways that we can help incentivize your company is that we help bring in some of our leading experts to help you with permitting and environmental questions. Also, we can help, in some cases, provide some free upfront legal guidance on navigating tax incentives and South Carolina laws to help maximize the incentives for your company. And we offer engineering consulting services for a limited time. And then finally, Our regional alliances in our counties also develop and operate industrial parks and buildings. And we do that solely for the purpose of recruiting companies like yours. So that is just a few of the ways that we can help your company when you're looking to locate in the US. And then finally, I just have a few slides that we can share with you later that show you some of the buildings and facilities that we're developing along I-95 to attract companies like yours. The Point South Commerce Park, we've developed a spec building there that was built with food processing in mind. And you can check that out on our website, southerncarolina.org. And here's another spec building along I-95 that we have developed. And then finally, we have huge tracts of land that we are developing for larger projects as well, again, with all the infrastructure in place. This one happens to be 15 minutes from the Port of Savannah. And then finally, one point I did want to make is in South Carolina, to incentivize particularly agribusiness and companies that are looking to locate in rural areas, we have very high tax incentives or job tax credits for those who are locating in the less developed counties like ours. You can see that those incentives for Tier 3 and Tier 4 are $20,000 to $25,000 per job created. And then finally, here's just some more information on the fact that we have research universities, Clemson University, and a national laboratory for your company to work with. I know a lot of our European companies are concerned about those partnerships, and we can make introductions for you in that regard. And then you have workforce training throughout the state. There are locations within about a 15-minute drive of any industrial property in our state. And we do all of these things, of course, to make South Carolina very attractive for your company. And we do this because we know the best way for us to improve quality of life for our citizens is through job creation. Thank you very much, and we'll be glad to answer any questions later that you may send through Nicolette. And we appreciate your time.
Thanks a lot, Kay. We appreciate it. I love how you mentioned some of the smaller companies that have located within your counties because, you know, the states here, we love to tout all of the big name companies that we have, but South Carolina actually is made up of many small to medium-sized businesses. So please do not be deterred by all of the big names that we'll put on our slides because we can most certainly help you if you do not consider yourself as a large corporation. But, you know, our goal is that you take your locations into the US, but then specifically within South Carolina. So we do have a poll, our last one before our next speaker, just to kind of gauge from our audience how many of you are currently deciding on a US physical location. So if you can just take a few minutes to fill out this poll, we'll get the answers at the end. Just a few more seconds. All right, so you've heard from our county and state representatives, but we also partner with some private sector organizations in the state as well. So up next, we have two representatives from Haynesworth Sinclair Boyd. Gary Morris and Will Johnson are joining us today. So Gary is involved in all aspects of real estate transactions, including acquisitions, land use, and financing. He works closely with clients seeking to locate or expand their company function. And after him, we'll have Will join us, and he leads the Economic Development Practice Group and works with negotiating incentives and advising on taxes. So Gary, I'll go ahead and let you have the room.
Thank you, Nicolette. I might add that Will and I typically are representing companies that locate their business in the state of South Carolina. And what I'm going to talk about are certain factors that a business must consider before establishing itself in the state of South Carolina. So the first thing is if a company wants to establish a business in South Carolina, it must choose a vehicle for the investment and to do the business. So that means a choice of entity. And there's several factors that go into this choice of entity. There'll be tax considerations, that's a major factor. Treaties will come into effect with the various countries, see how tax income will be treated. There'll be capitalization questions, debt versus equity. There'll be repatriation issues, how do funds get back to the parent company, those sort of issues. All those go into the structure and the choice of entity. And typically most companies are going to choose one or two entities. It's either going to be a corporation, which you're going to be familiar with, that's shareholders, directors, officers, a more structured entity. Sometimes companies will choose a limited liability company, which is comprised of members, and the members run the company, or the members can appoint a manager to run the company. Most of our foreign clients establish corporations, and they may establish a holding company, and I'll talk about that in just a minute, and then have different companies develop from that. Once you decide the entity you want to establish in the US, you must choose a state of organization. State laws control the organization of the entity. If you're going to locate a business in South Carolina, there are really only two states that you look at. You either look at South Carolina or Delaware. Both are business-friendly states. Larger companies, in our experience, the larger companies tend to choose Delaware because it has a more developed body of law that addresses many issues that larger companies have. Smaller and medium-sized companies, they often choose South Carolina. It's less expensive, less tedious, and still is business friendly. The holding company concept I was talking about is we have several companies that come in and they want to establish a holding company. They want to avoid risk to the assets. So they'll establish a separate company that'll be owned by the holding company to hold the assets. And then another company will be established that will house the operations, and the employees will be part of the operation. That way the assets are more protected. They may be leased to that particular operating company. That's something to consider. Tax also is instrumental in that structure. Next thing is we have tax considerations. There are really three levels of tax in the United States. You have federal income tax, federal employment taxes, federal level. Then you have state taxes, and then you have local taxes. We have municipalities and counties, and there'll be taxes at that level. If we focus on South Carolina, there are really only three types of taxes in South Carolina. State income tax, corporations are taxed at 5%. However, if you're a manufacturer or a processor, you're only taxed on really your sales in the state of South Carolina. If you produce a lot of product that goes outside the state, you're not subject to income taxes. Other type of tax are sales taxes. Typical sales tax in this state is 6%. It can be increased by 1 or 2% by the local political subdivisions if they so desire. There are exemptions for sales tax for manufacturers and processors, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Also, and one of the main taxes is at the local level, and that's property taxes. Property taxes mainly fund our schools in this state. So they tend to be a little higher. But there are incentives that are designed to reduce those property taxes that we'll talk about a little later. Employment is a big issue. South Carolina is an at-will state. What that means is an employer in South Carolina can hire and fire at will. Don't have any extra regulations. There are a few limitations, discrimination, and the other limitations you see before you. South Carolina does not promote unions in this state. They prefer the right to work laws. So, but if you have a union, you will have to pay attention to that and the laws in your contracts that deal with that. I will point out that some of the key employees often have employment contracts. The employment contracts are designed not only to establish the terms of employment, but they also have provisions in them like non-disclosure, non-compete provisions, confidentiality provisions in case these employees have the ability to have different access to confidentiality of the company. I also mentioned often companies will be advised to establish an employee handbook. The handbook can be important and is advisable. It sets the terms for employment with your various employees. In other words, established vacation time, leave of absence, and other critical aspects that are important to employees. Once you do this, it's kind of like a contract, but it is important because it sets out the rules for employees. Visas for foreign nationals are also important. I'm not going to go into visas. There are several different types of visas, especially difficult now during this time, but we have lawyers in our firm that work specifically in this area and deal with visas for different nationals. All right. There are a few other things. I'm not going to go into all this, but contracts are important. Especially you'll have purchase and supply contracts, non-disclosure agreements. Those are important because of it sets the terms, avoids any controversy, or if there is any issues, you go to your contracts. We're governed by contract law, especially in this state. And property, we find that manufacturers in particular or processors like to own property. If you have just a sales office, you may want to lease property. These are the various aspects that you must go through. Ownership is kept in records maintained at the county level. Those records must be searched. There's a process to avoid any environmental liability with the property. And then of course you look at property taxes and zoning. And I am going to briefly go through, we look at insurance. That's important. The idea is to avoid any risk. Those are types of insurance. I'll quickly go through this. Intellectual property can be important as well. I want to make sure you're protected in that regard. Securities law, this only comes in if you're soliciting investment in your company. We have had companies that come in and they say, establish it, but we want to set us up so we can make a public offering sometime, and that's when this comes into effect. And then there are other business considerations. This is just a brief overview. I'm going to turn it over to Will now, but this will, we're available to answer any questions or explain anything that you may need. So you're welcome to call us. Thank you. Will.
Thank you, Gary. And Nicolette, I think you guys are going to hand over the control of the slides, so I'll start advancing those in a second. First of all, I'm happy to be with all of you today. I wish we were together in person like we would normally be, but we're at least glad to have this alternative outlet for getting together with you today. Also happy to be with this great group of panelists. What Clint and his team have done at Department of Agriculture has been really great. I mean, they have gone to an entirely new level in terms of agriculture, stepping into the economic development arena and really playing a key role in bringing businesses to the state. Ted Campbell, outstanding project manager at the Department of Commerce, has really developed an expertise there, which is great for our state, but it's also great for businesses like you who are coming in and looking at potentially doing business here. Kay Maxwell with the Southern Carolina Alliance has had a tremendous amount of success in that part of the state, particularly in the agribusiness space. So I think she's the perfect person. And Gary and I have been working together for almost 20 years. I sometimes say Gary taught me everything I know, for better or worse. Again, my name is Will Johnson. As Nicolette mentioned, I practice law with Haynesworth Sinclair Boyd. I'm right here in Columbia, South Carolina, and I have a map on the wall if you don't know exactly where we are. So this map is South Carolina and North Carolina, and I'm right here in the middle in Columbia. Kay is down here in the more southern part of the state in Barnwell. And as mentioned earlier, we would love to welcome any or all of you to the state. We like to show it off in person. We think it shows a little better than on the computer screen. So what I think I would focus on today is whoops, having a little trouble with the slides here. Sorry. What I'd like to do is focus on some of the really state and local specific issues. And I think when I first started in this business, I was really doing a lot of work on incentives, and I tended to really focus on incentives and think about, okay, this incentive is worth X dollars, this other program is worth Y dollars. And what I think I've come to appreciate, particularly from hearing a lot of site consultants speak, is that really the overall cost of doing business is what's important to people like you who are thinking about doing business here. So the incentives that we have are extremely valuable. That if I were advising you and looking at South Carolina and maybe comparing South Carolina to other places, we would certainly want to start with, okay, what are the costs of doing business here? What are the costs that are specific to South Carolina? And then we would go into the next step of, are there any incentives or are there any programs to offset those costs? And so in terms of kind of the key, the key state and local taxes, and Gary mentioned a couple of these. We have a corporate income tax in South Carolina that's 5% in general. I'll do some things that can reduce that. We have a state sales and use tax of 6% across the state, and then sometimes another 1 to 2% local level. And then we have property taxes that are imposed on the ownership of property that vary pretty widely across the state. Some others that I won't go into there just in the interest of time today that you can see. Apologize, I'm still having a little trouble with the slide here. As I mentioned, though, my objective here would be really to help you understand the cost of doing business, and then second, to look at incentives that could help offset those costs. And certainly if you were looking in more detail at South Carolina, we would go into each of these things in considerably more detail. So kind of looking at those three big state and local costs, the first is the corporate income tax. Our corporate income tax rate in South Carolina is 5%, as I mentioned. That's a fairly favorable rate compared to some parts of the state. Many are higher. There are a few lower. And what I would say to anybody before you just look at that number, and if you were, say, comparing to a state that has a lower percentage, I would say that it's also very important to think about what the tax base is here. So what income is actually subject to that state corporate income tax. And as Gary mentioned earlier, for companies that are selling goods beyond South Carolina, whether they're selling regionally, nationally, or even internationally, we have very favorable allocation and apportionment rules that often essentially eliminate that state corporate income tax. I have a bullet point list of some of the kind of the key corporate income tax credits that are available to companies that are investing in South Carolina. Kay mentioned job tax credits earlier, which go all the way up to $25,000 in our most rural counties. And that's actually $25,000 per job per year for 5 years. So those numbers can really become pretty significant. So if a company does have a significant amount of South Carolina income tax liability, for example, if it is selling significant amounts of products within South Carolina and making a nice profit on those sales, these job tax credits can come into play and significantly reduce that burden. I also put in bold, because of the topic of today, the new credits for purchases of South Carolina agricultural products. Clint mentioned that program earlier, and I just have a little more detail on the next slide here. I think both of those things have been mentioned today. So the only thing that I'll add here is that several years ago, some of the programs that we have were not really available to agribusiness companies. They were focused on traditional manufacturing, warehousing, distribution, processing, R&D, et cetera. But recent changes to the law now expand these programs to all the types of companies that Ted mentioned, that Clint mentioned, and that we've focused on throughout the discussion today. The second item in terms of kind of the big picture state and local tax is sales and use tax. So we don't have a VAT in the United States like many countries in Europe and around the world. But we do have a sales and use tax at the local level. And right now that rate is 6% in South Carolina, plus each county and even sometimes cities can impose an additional 1 to 2%, maybe even 3% on top of that. So in terms of sales tax, you would first look at what is the rate in the jurisdiction that you're considering, and then you would look at the types of purchases that you would be making and whether those purchases would qualify for exclusions or exemptions. There are many, many, many exclusions and exemptions in South Carolina. In fact, there was a court case essentially challenging our sales tax exemption, saying we have so many that it's arbitrary and frivolous, and the person who challenged our sales tax statute lost that case. So all these exclusions and exemptions have effectively been upheld. Now, I've included some of the keys in this bullet point list here, and for many businesses that I suspect are on the call today, the resale exemption would be huge. So if you're buying a product for resale, that would be exempt. Along the same line, if you're buying an input for a product that's being manufactured that will then be resold, those inputs will not be subject to sales tax. Manufacturing equipment is exempt. Recycling equipment. We have some exemptions for material handling and construction equipment for very large projects, as noted. And I'll skip ahead just in the interest of time. We also have quite a few agricultural exemptions. So I won't read this list to you, but for many companies in the agribusiness space, particularly if you're more on the traditional agricultural side, some of these exemptions will come into play. And I have to, at this point, apologize for my terrible graphics. One of our intellectual property lawyers really scared me a few years ago. I used to find really clever graphics on Google Images, and he scared me to death that I was going to be infringing on someone's intellectual property rights. So now I use these terrible free clip art images. The other big piece that Gary and I spend a lot of time on is property tax. So we do have a property tax that's imposed on the ownership of both real estate and personal property, which includes machinery and equipment, furniture and fixtures in South Carolina. And that property tax is a product of three factors, which is in the sort of the second item here: the value of the property times the statewide assessment ratio times the local millage rate. So there are some factors that go into each of those three components. And one of the key questions, as I've noted here, is what type of business you are. If you are classified as a true agricultural company in South Carolina, which is more traditionally a farming type operation, you would have extremely favorable property taxes. So in South Carolina, our statewide assessment ratio for manufacturing is 10.5%. Although that ratio is gradually being phased down to 9% over a 6-year period, and we're halfway there. For commercial real estate, that assessment ratio is 6%. For owner-occupied residential and for agricultural property, it is as low as 4%, although 6% is typically the case for corporate-owned agriculture other than closely held corporations. I'll elaborate on that in a second. The third component is the millage rate, which is established each year by local governments. So every county, city, and school district in the state establishes its own millage rate that's reset every year. So there's quite a lot of variance there. And if you were looking at locations in South Carolina, you would want to make sure that you understand what that local millage rate is and what that local property tax costs would look like. Here I've elaborated on the benefits of agricultural classification. So as I mentioned, 4% for individuals, partnerships, and closely held corporations with 4 factors that are outlined here. 6% for other corporations. So if you can qualify for that agricultural classification, that would be great. We also have a complete property tax exemption for agricultural products owned by producers in South Carolina, farm machinery and equipment, including greenhouses, all livestock and live poultry. So some nice property tax exemptions there. And then even beyond agriculture, I should mention that we do not impose a property tax on inventory in South Carolina, which is not true of all states. So that's certainly a competitive advantage for us. Now, if you do have a property tax burden and it's significant, we have multiple things that can offset that burden. One is if you are considered a manufacturer, we have an exemption that would reduce your millage rate, which results in a bottom line reduction to your bill for 5 years. Although even better, the third bullet point here would I would say be the key on property taxes. We typically negotiate what we call fee in lieu of tax and or special source revenue credit agreements. And while we use lots of acronyms and legal terminology, the bottom line is that these programs significantly reduce property taxes. They are typically available for companies investing $2.5 million in capital expenses over a 6-year period. We do sometimes have programs that are available for smaller companies as well, but those programs can really provide a major reduction. And I mentioned in the parenthetical here, often more than a 50% reduction in property tax. And so that's a really critical tool. I think I might have gone backwards there. We have some additional incentives that I would say are not tied to any of the particular taxes I just described, that are just generally available to companies looking at South Carolina. And since we're about out of time, I won't go through the bullet points in detail, but job development credits are available to companies creating 10 or more new jobs in South Carolina. Those job development credits provide refunds of employee income tax withholding paid to the state of South Carolina. Those credits are effectively as good as cash. They're viewed as very, very valuable. They are also competitive. They have to be negotiated. You have to go through a process of applying to the Department of Commerce and being approved for those credits. The second item here would be just cash grants. Similarly, the grants are very competitive. They require an application process, and grants are typically going to be provided to reimburse companies for costs of hard assets that they put in the ground in South Carolina. So a company would have to, for instance, build a building, improve a building, or install infrastructure and then be reimbursed for those costs. And then the third item, utility grants. We have lots of utilities in the company, power, water companies, et cetera. Each of those utilities receives dollar for dollar tax credits of up to $400,000 per year in infrastructure grants. And so if a project that you're considering has infrastructure costs associated with it, these utility grants can really come in handy to help offset those costs. Final slide that I have, just a recap of the key items that I discussed today. Again, the objectives, if we were to go forward with really considering sites in South Carolina, would be number one, to understand these costs of doing business so that we can understand exactly how they impact your bottom line. And then the second thing would be looking at South Carolina's incentive programs to see what, if anything, we can do to offset some of those costs. And then if you don't remember anything else that I've said, I would just remember this. It's very important to start this discussion early. Sometimes we have companies who come in, they buy real estate, they get started, and then they come to us saying, can you help us with incentives? There are some incentives that we call non-discretionary, which just means if you meet the requirements, you qualify, and we can help companies, with those kinds of incentives. But many of the programs that I talked about do require negotiation on the front end. They require coordination and negotiation with the Department of Commerce, Department of Agriculture, and the county where you're located. So it's very important to start early and to consider your options on the front end before you've made final decisions. So with that being said, that's all I have. Contact information for Gary and me is here. Gary and some of my other colleagues often say that my picture needs to be updated to reflect all of the gray hair that you see now, but I assure you that's the same person, and we'd love to hear you and assist with any follow-up questions. I would love to welcome you to South Carolina. Thank you.
Thank you both, Gary and Will. We appreciate the knowledge that you guys have about, the legal aspects of locating within the state. And we appreciate you joining us today to kind of give everyone an idea. We will go ahead and jump into our question and answers portion. We have about 5 more minutes of our webinar, so we'll bring all of our speakers back onto video and take a few questions. And just a reminder that if we're not able to get to your question today, we'll be sure to follow up with you all after the webinar. All right. So one of the reoccurring questions we had was regarding ag tech. So I think Clint and Ted, maybe you guys can touch base on just what opportunities there are for research and development, innovation, specifically referring to technology once a company is in South Carolina.
So I would just say that ag tech is one of our key segments, as you saw earlier from my slide. We're more than willing and exciting to work with any of these companies. From a specific ag tech standpoint, talked about the Controlled Environmental Agriculture project earlier. Indoor farming is heavily reliant on ag tech and advancements, and so working with, I think Ted mentioned it, Clemson and their food science and food packaging programs. We're happy to link whomever up with that. I think that from a pure agricultural standpoint, we all know that the world is continuing to grow and we have to feed more and more people every day. So we're working with some of the ADMs and Helena chemical companies that Kay mentioned to find technologies in food production. And I'll give you an example. Israel, the country of Israel, has invested and really been very aggressive with water technologies, and we've had some conversations there. It's something that we're very interested in. And even the small program that I mentioned, ACRE, Agribusiness Center for Research and Entrepreneurship, did invest, I think a year and a half ago, in an ag tech small company that was already located here and founded by a farmer to do some water and moisture technology. So this is something we're very focused on, we're very interested in. And Ted, I don't know if you have any additional thoughts, but we're more than happy to work in the specifics of this arena.
No, I think you covered it well, Clint. I think our connections locally were relatively small, so we could help you with the university connections. I think the Department of Agriculture would be a good segue into that. Glad to help.
So Kay, during your presentation, you mentioned a little bit about free office space and landing pads. Can you maybe touch base on that really quickly on what type of company would qualify for this program?
Well, it really depends on which area of the state you're in and what your company's needs are. But we have in South Carolina what we call landing pads and also business incubators. And one of the reasons we've really pushed the landing pads is that we're finding that a lot of European companies sometimes are a little hesitant about their investment on the front end. So they may start with locating a sales representative in the US or just opening an office or a small distribution location. So we have facilities here that can offer, in some cases, free rent for 6 months or a year. Sometimes it's a discounted lease for those companies. And in other cases, we have distribution and manufacturing space that the local economic developers can assist you with. to help you get your feet on the ground and get your startup. I just wanted to reiterate along those lines, if you have interest in locating in the U.S., it's very important that you work with the economic development team, because we're here to make it easy for you. We've seen too many European companies that come in and try to do it on their own. They don't have an attorney here in the U.S. I would encourage you to get a U.S. attorney who can help you navigate the system, and also that you work with your local and state economic development team to help you find your way.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you. We'll just do 2 more questions. Gary, can you tell us a little bit about what key elements should be taken into consideration when comparing the different states?
Sure. Ted mentioned one of them, cost of living. What we're finding is a lot of the food processing and manufacturing facilities are looking more closely at the Southeast and South Carolina in particular. But I think you look at the cost of living, you look at the quality of life for your employees. South Carolina has, on the east side, you have the beaches and ocean. On the other west side, you have the mountains and the like. So you look at the quality of life. But more importantly than that, I think companies need to look at the regulatory climate. And South Carolina has done a lot of work over the last 10 years to make the regulatory agencies more business friendly, and they've succeeded in that. The regulatory agencies will try to help you. They'll be responsive. They're still regulatory agencies, but they'll be responsive to you, and they'll try to help you keep within the guidelines. So I think that's very important.
And our last question is for Will. How does the U.S. differ from the EU in terms of incentives?
Yeah, thanks, Nicolette. I've had discussions with European lawyers I've worked with on this issue, and they find it very perplexing how we operate in the U.S. So my understanding is that in the EU regulations actually prohibit countries from competing against each other using tax incentives, grants, things like that. We don't have those rules in the United States, and so we actually have quite a bit of competition between states that can actually, well, it can work to the significant benefit of companies, because we do have states that are very aggressively trying to win a project for their state as opposed to the other. And I will say, even within the state, I do think we have a very friendly state. We work together, but even local communities in the state, while they play well together, at the same time, understandably, Kay Maxwell would want to win a project for the region that she represents in the Southern Carolina Alliance. And the good news for people on the call today is that can work to your benefit.
Thank you. Thank you for all of the speakers. We really appreciate you participating in today. We don't have much more time left, so we will go ahead and just thank all of our participants for joining us today. If we did not get to your question, we'll be sure to follow up with you with an answer. And as mentioned before, no time is too early to reach out to us. So even if you are not looking to invest in a location within the next 2 to 3 years, still feel free to reach out to our offices. We're more than happy to help you all along the way. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you all.